He was celebrated as the hero of the Holy Sword, the man who kept an entire kingdom safe for 19 years. Yet in the blink of an eye, the same people who once cheered his name hurled stones and branded him a criminal. The king himself signed the order for his exile, and the sacred blade that had chosen him was forced back into the stone. How could the savior of thousands become the villain overnight? Why was the kingdom so eager to destroy its own hero? Let's dive into this fall from glory together with Narumi as we enter the story. Inside the grand castle, flames from towering braziers painted the throne room in gold. Wells stood tall before the throne, his armor scarred but gleaming. The king looked down with a gentle smile and spoke the words everyone in the kingdom knew by heart. Hero of the Holy Sword. Once again, Wells had kept the kingdom safe from magic beasts. Once again, the people could celebrate the new year without fear. The king leaned back and sighed. Only one more year until retirement, he said, and for the first time in decades, he would finally be able to breathe. He looked at Wells with gratitude, calling him the guardian of their peace. The court erupted in applause, but Wells only bowed his head. 19 years earlier, he had been nothing but a commoner. Everything changed the day he pulled the holy sword Elsring from the stone. His life was no longer his own. Sometimes he still wondered if this was all a dream. That night, the king held a banquet in his honor. Music filled the halls, banners fluttered, wine flowed like rivers. The king raised his cup and told Wells the celebration was for him, so he should drink to his heart's content. Wells smiled politely and bowed again, but his eyes drifted over the glittering hall. It still felt surreal to sit at the royal table. Across from him sat Lord Vat, ruler of Krenlard, with his wife Queen Falasil. Beside them were their daughters, Marisil, the saintly first princess, and Alisil, the curious younger sister. Wells thanked the king formally, but Lord Vat only laughed and waved a hand. "Call me Big Brother," he said. "You are no stranger to us." Falasil chuckled and teased her husband for drinking too much, though she too asked Wells to call her big sister. Marisil leaned forward with sparkling eyes, praising Wells for his victory in yesterday's battle. Alisil quickly chimed in, begging to hear the story. Wells thought to himself how strange life was. A man with no family, no lover, 34 years old and alone, yet here he was, dining with royalty at the dawn of the year. For a moment, the mood was warm. But then Lord Vat slammed his cup down with excitement. "By the way," he said, "there is good news. At today's hero selection, someone finally pulled out the Holy Lance Vanel." Gasps circled the table. Alisil said she had been there. Even the strongest knights could not make the lance move, but a young boy had lifted it with ease. Marisil nodded, remembering the shock of it. Wells explained calmly that a sacred weapon never responds to brute strength. It chooses only those truly worthy. Alisil tilted her head, asking what he meant. Wells told her of mana, the life force flowing in every living thing, from fish in the river to the trees of the forest. Only by channeling mana into a sacred weapon could it cut down a magic beast, but the cost was heavy. Mana burned quickly, draining the wielder. That was why heroes were chosen not by appearance, not by muscle, but by the will of the weapon itself. Marisil whispered that she understood now. Strength was not enough. A hero needed the blessing of mana. Wells nodded. Queen Falasil agreed that those who could wield mana were rare. Lord Vat added that was why the kingdom owed gratitude not just to heroes, but to saints and mages as well. Then he leaned closer with a mischievous grin. "About your retirement," he said, "I will offer you my 2 precious daughters. Which one will you marry?" Wells nearly choked on his drink. He stammered that he was unworthy, that both princesses were like nieces to him. But Lord Vat pressed on, reminding him he was not young anymore. He needed a partner for appearances. His predecessor, Marissa, had also been a commoner, yet she married into the royal family. "Citizens dream of marrying royalty after becoming a hero," Lord Vat said. "Why should you be different?" Wells clenched his fists and forced a smile. "Those two fell in love naturally," he answered. "I only ask for a modest pension. Let me train the new hero and that will be enough." Lord Vat sighed in disappointment. "You are always so serious." Marisil quickly poured Wells another drink, trying to lighten the mood. And in that moment, the feast continued. But Wells felt the weight of invisible chains. Glory was a crown, but it was also a shackle. Later, in the quiet of his guest chamber, Wells collapsed onto his bed. "I drank too much," he muttered. A voice answered playfully, "That is rare. I have never seen you this drunk." Wells turned to the holy sword resting against the wall. "Elsie," he said softly. She was the spirit within the blade, once human but now bound to steel. For 19 years, she had been his partner in every battle. Elsie teased that Lord Vat got pushy when drunk, but he meant no harm. Then she huffed and said she still had a woman's heart, so he should not treat her lightly. Wells chuckled. "I only hear your voice, so it hardly matters." She snapped back for him to shut up, and he only laughed. He admitted he had never seen her face, though she had seen every thought inside his head. He groaned, asking her to stop reading his mind without permission. She rolled her eyes, but her tone softened. Wells asked if the next hero would be able to hear her. She paused. "No," she said. "Until now, only you. But at least you have a successor. Forget the talk of brides. This year will be full of beast hunts and rookie training." Wells lay back smiling faintly. "Only 1 year left," he whispered. "I will be counting on you," Elsie answered. "And I will be counting on you too." The room fell silent. Outside, fireworks for the new year cracked the night sky, but inside, Wells drifted into uneasy sleep. He thought the next year would be like the ones before. He thought the peace he had earned would last. But when a man believes he has finally reached safety, that is often the moment when fate sharpens its blade. The new year had barely begun when Wells woke to the sound of screams. He blinked, disoriented, and found himself behind iron bars. The smell of damp stone filled his lungs. What had happened to his bed in the guest chamber? Guards dragged him from the cell, chains clinking at his wrists. They marched him into the royal square where a massive crowd waited. Citizens hurled stones and curses, their words cut sharper than steel. They shouted that the hero had disgraced the kingdom, that he had assaulted St. Marisil while drunk. Wells staggered under the blows, his mind spinning. Assault? He thought he had been asleep. He had no memory of touching Marisil, yet the voices of the crowd rose higher, feeding on each other like wildfire. Then he saw him, the vice-captain of the knights, a man who had always despised him. In his hands gleamed the holy sword Elsring. Wells froze. The knight smirked. So the mighty hero of the sword finally fell. He held up a letter stamped with the royal seal. This, he declared, was an imperial order signed by the king himself. The punishment was exile. Elsie's voice rang inside Wells's mind, trembling with rage. "This is a farce," she said. "A total joke." Wells stared at the letter, stunned. The knight sneered, calling him a fraud who clung to the title of hero for too long. He accused him of laying filthy hands on noble Lady Marisil, calling him the real beast. Wells's lips parted, but no words came. The crowd shouted louder, demanding he be cast out. The knight shoved Elsring back into Wells's hands, daring him to resist. Wells's shoulders sagged. Slowly, he walked to the pedestal of stone and pressed the holy sword back into it. The blade sank with a resonant chime. Elsie gasped. She whispered that she had failed to protect him, but Wells only smiled faintly. "No," he said. "Thanks to you, I became a hero. I should be the one apologizing." He turned his back on the kingdom he had defended for 19 years and walked away. Goodbye. That moment was the death of his title. A hero turned into a criminal before the eyes of his people. And the cruelest cut was not the stones thrown at him, but the silence of those he had saved. The knight shoved him into a carriage, then hurled him into the dirt miles away. "Go wherever you want, criminal," the man spat before riding off. Wells sat in the dust, staring at the empty road. Without Elsring, he was no hero. Without a title, he was no one. He thought of Elsie, and suddenly her voice answered from a small dagger. She explained she could inhabit this blade too. The holy sword no longer mattered. What mattered was him. She cursed the kingdom for discarding him after all his devotion. They were worse than the beasts, she said. Wells lowered his head. He could have fought back, but he had chosen silence. If he had resisted, the image of the hero he admired would have been stained forever. Better to accept disgrace than taint the legend. Tears welled in his eyes as though weight of it all crushed him. Days passed. He wandered from village to village, only to be turned away. A soldier apologized that they had no food to spare. Another guard accused him of treason and demanded he leave at once. Everywhere his wanted poster had already spread. Elsie grew furious. "Why is this happening so fast?" she asked. Wells sighed. "Thanks to this," he said, "I am denied everywhere." Perhaps he could find one place where they would accept him. "But when?" she demanded. "When will that happen?" Then she offered a reckless idea. "What if we go west into demon territory?" Wells blinked. Demon territory? No human nations existed there. Only demons and non-humans lived beyond those lands. To humans, it was hell itself. He hesitated. Without Elsring, how could he survive? But Elsie cut him off. "You can do it," she said. "I will guarantee it." For the first time in days, Wells felt a flicker of resolve. If Elsie believed in him, then he would try. He chuckled bitterly. "It's not like we have anywhere else to go." Weeks later, deep in the forest, Wells crawled across the ground, half dead. His lips cracked, his vision blurred. He whispered to Elsie that he was dying. "This is it." But Elsie scolded him. A little suffering would not kill him. He groaned, then collapsed. A poke on his cheek stirred him. He opened his eyes to see a little girl with blue hair and crimson horns tapping him with a stick. She smiled shyly. Wells tried to ask for water, but his voice failed. Elsie spoke for him. "Look at her," she said. "Red eyes, horns, almost angelic." Wells groaned for her to stop reading his thoughts. A woman appeared, calling the girl Delilah. She asked what she was doing. Delilah giggled and said the man wanted to eat worms. Her mother frowned in confusion but helped Wells up. She gave him water as his vision swam. He thought maybe he had died, and this was heaven. Elsie warned him quietly. These were demons, Oni folk. Wells tensed, but the woman smiled kindly. She said her name was Natalia, and this was her daughter. They would take him to their village. Wells apologized for troubling them and introduced himself. Natalia carried him with surprising strength, explaining it was Kyoku, a technique of the Oni bloodline. By focusing mana into their bodies, they could enhance their power. Wells marveled at their ability. They brought him to their home where he met Eliza, Natalia's mother-in-law, and the village chief. Wells bowed, embarrassed. He had collapsed searching for demon territory and feared they would cast him out once they saw his brand as a criminal. But Eliza only smiled. Humans rarely visited, she said, but they would not judge him by marks. Before Wells could answer, a roar split the air. Villagers rushed in, shouting that a magic beast had appeared at the borders. Men fought desperately, but they could not hold it for long. Eliza ordered defenses raised. Natalia clutched Delilah and told Wells they needed to flee to safety. But Wells stopped her. He asked if Oni had a way to kill a magic beast. Natalia hesitated, then explained the secret of Oni Dash. By breaking their own horn and pouring all mana into it, Oni men could forge a crimson blade sharp enough to wound a beast. But the cost was death. A single strike, traded for a life? Elsie's voice trembled. That is suicide, she said. Wells's eyes hardened. Like hell I would let that happen. He bolted toward the battlefield, dagger in hand. Natalia called after him, her voice breaking. It was the same path her husband had taken years ago, the path that had left her widowed. She collapsed to her knees, haunted by memory. Wells ran into the night. Elsie pleaded with him. He no longer had the holy sword. Without it, he was just a man. But Wells thought of Delilah's smile, of Natalia's kindness. He gripped the dagger. He still had something left to protect. The ground shook with the beast's roar. Its shadow loomed like a mountain. Wells raised the dagger and shouted, telling himself he could not back down. He lunged, teeth gritted, as the beast's fangs closed around him. And in that moment, everything hung by a thread. The magic beast lunged like a mountain of flesh in rage. Its jaws clamped down on Wells's arm, tearing through armor and flesh alike. Pain exploded through him, but he refused to let go. With his other hand, he drove the dagger again and again into the beast's neck. Blood sprayed, thick and hot, but he kept stabbing, every thrust fueled by 19 years of battle. The villagers screamed for him to fall back. They shouted that without a sacred weapon he had no chance. But Wells roared that he would deal with it. Elsie's voice echoed in his head, frantic. "Its neck is the weak spot," she cried. "But how will you kill it? That thing is fully grown." Wells bared his teeth. "Then I will stab it until it stops moving." It was madness, yet he did not stop. Blow after blow until the beast collapsed with a thunderous crash. Wells fell beside it, gasping for air, his dagger dripping. For a long moment, the battlefield was silent. Then he realized something impossible. Magic beasts could not be scratched without a sacred weapon. So, how had he done it? Elsie's voice quivered, half proud and half exasperated. "I told you 1,000 times. Do you even realize? Your mana is insane. You flooded that tiny dagger with so much power it became a pseudo-sacred weapon. Just for a second, but it was enough. You killed a magic beast with your own strength." The Oni men stared at him, then erupted in cheers. He had done what no outsider ever could. Yet in the midst of celebration, Natalia rushed forward. She slapped him hard across the face. "Who fights a magic beast alone with a dagger that tiny? What do you think your life is worth?" The crowd fell silent. Wells tried to laugh it off, saying it was only a scratch, but Natalia grabbed his wounded arm. Mana flared from her hands. In an instant, the gash closed, faster than any healing magic Wells had seen, even faster than Saint Marisil. He blinked in shock. Was this another gift of the Oni? But Natalia was crying. Her tears streamed down her face as she whispered that she was only glad he was alive. Wells froze, stunned by the raw emotion. Before he could answer, Delilah stomped up, her little face red with anger. She shouted that he had made Mama cry and ordered him to hug them. The warrior who had just slain a beast stood speechless before a child's demand. Elsie sighed, calling him hopeless. Wells knelt awkwardly and let Delilah climb into his arms. Natalia smiled through tears, thanking him for saving them all. Wells whispered back that he was just glad he could protect them. That night, the village honored him as one of their own. Eliza, the chief, declared that in the eyes of the Oni, he was no criminal. To them, he was the hero who saved their people. For the first time since his exile, Wells felt like he belonged somewhere. He began staying in the chief's home with Natalia and Delilah, hunting beasts around the region. Soon he met Grain, the Oni blacksmith, who proudly handed him a sword he had forged. It gleamed like the holy sword, though Grain laughed and admitted it was just a replica. Still, Elsie was able to inhabit the blade, her voice ringing clearer than ever. Wells smiled. This will make hunting easier. Grain clapped him on the shoulder, saying if Wells had not arrived, he would have been forced to use Oni Dash himself. Now the village had hope without sacrifice. The hunts grew easier. Wells returned with beast corpses, but left the magic stones untouched. Darakan, the butcher, stared at him in disbelief one night over drinks. Did he not know, he asked, that magic stones were worth as much as gold coins? Wells blinked. He thought they were only used for sacred weapons. Darakan laughed, saying some stones were even more valuable than gold. Elsie admitted even she had not known their worth. Wells realized the truth. All those years, knights had collected stones while he fought beasts, and he had never asked questions. Heroes made the kingdom rich without even knowing it. Darukan rested a hand on Wells's shoulder. In his eyes, Wells deserved far more than he ever received. Wells shook his head. Not really, he said. Darukan smiled. Then maybe it was the human world that was wrong. Here, the Oni knew his value. In the weeks that followed, Wells grew close to Natalia and Delilah. Delilah clung to him, refusing to go to bed without his stories. Natalia often caught him staying up late, poring over notes and sketches. She asked what he was working on. He confessed that he wanted to find a way to stop Oni Dash from killing their men. The Oni could control mana better than humans, he reasoned. If they learned to harness it differently, perhaps no one would need to die again. Natalia was moved. She told him he had already done enough, yet he only smiled. You were the ones who helped me first, he said. She turned away quickly, offering to make him a midnight snack. Elsie teased him that Natalia clearly cared for him. Wells blushed and muttered that when it came to things like love, he was hopeless. That was why he had been betrayed so easily. Elsie's voice softened. You are doing just fine, she told him. I am with you, not because you were a hero, but because of who you are. Later, Eliza visited him during training. She thanked him for thinking of ways to help her people. Then she asked carefully what he thought of Natalia. Wells froze. Eliza explained that Natalia had lost her parents, her husband, and her son to beasts, yet she never stopped smiling. Since Wells arrived, both she and Delilah had started smiling again for real. Eliza looked into his eyes. Promise me one thing, she said. Do not die. I never want to see those two cry like that again. Wells swallowed hard and nodded. Time passed and Wells's hunts became more efficient. He returned with sacks full of magic stones. Grain whistled at the hall, asking what he planned. Wells said if stones were worth gold, then he wanted to forge something stronger. A sword, tougher, sharper, worthy of protecting everyone. Grain studied him, then confessed his dream. There was one sword he had always wanted to forge but never could. A blade made entirely from magic stones. It would require absurd resources and a wielder with unmatched skill. He asked Wells if he would make that dream come true. Wells grinned. Of course, he said, and so the forge roared to life, sparks flying. Elsie slipped into the replica blade, humming with energy. For the first time since Exile, Wells felt not just like a survivor, but like a man with purpose again. Yet in the back of his mind, shadows lingered. He still wondered why the king had betrayed him. He still replayed the sneers of the princesses. The wound of exile had not vanished. But here, in the Oni village, he found something new. A family, a reason, and perhaps even a second chance at being the hero he once dreamed of becoming. Nights in the Oni village stretched long, and Wells often sat by the fire, haunted by memories of the kingdom he once served. One evening, Elsie's voice cut through the silence. There is something I never told you, she said. Something about your exile. Wells froze as she revealed the truth. On the night of the banquet, Marisol had slipped a sleeping drug into his drink. While he lay unconscious, she and Alicel staged the assault. The next morning, Alicel whispered to her sister that their plan had worked perfectly. Uncle Wells would now be branded a criminal, stripped of his title, and banished forever. The betrayal struck deeper than any beast's claw. Marisol had wavered, calling him a kind uncle, but Alicel was merciless. She reminded her sister of the day Belle Moray, the Holy Lance hero, appeared. Both princesses had fallen in love instantly. Their father once suggested that one of them marry Wells, but after Belle Moray, Wells was no longer worthy. Plain, older, and in the way, he had to be removed. Wells muttered that perhaps he had spoiled them too much. Perhaps he was pathetic. Elsie's voice snapped. Enough! Stop blaming yourself. The snakes who spread the scandal, the useless king and queen who allowed it, the citizens who turned on you in an instant, they are the problem. You were betrayed. For the first time since his exile, Wells felt the weight of guilt lift. No longer a discarded hero of a corrupt kingdom, but the protector of a new home. His vow was clear: to forge a holy sword not blessed by royalty, but by resolve. To guard those who had given him a second chance. And as the forge blazed, Wells smiled for the first time in years. That wraps up today's recap of Exiled Hero Picked Up by a Demon. What really stands out in this story is how it flips expectations. One moment Wells is a celebrated champion, and the next, he is betrayed and exiled, only to rise again among the Oni with grit and heart. That twist gave the series its highest score in sheer drama and emotional punch. But what about you? Do you think Wells's greatest moment was giving up his sword with dignity, or slaying a beast with nothing but a dagger? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this journey, hit like and subscribe to join me, Narumi, for more epic reviews. And remember, if this story hooked you, support the original author by buying and reading the official release.